All right, welcome to our last project for our unit on westward expansion. And for this, what we're going to be doing is designing murals. Okay, and murals, if you've never, well, I'm sure you've probably seen one, but if you've never heard that term before, are those great big, they're usually wall-sized, oftentimes paintings, they don't have to be, but they're pictures of some denomination that portray something important to the location. All right, and by the way, if you're looking for some ideas for murals, you want some ideas, there is a PowerPoint that's got sample murals just from as I've been traveling around. Okay, so it's worth knowing that those are not student samples. Those are like professional painters that get paid for what they do. I don't expect yours to be that fancy schmancy, but it will nonetheless give you some idea of kind of what we're really aiming for. All right, so back over here. So your mural, right, it needs to have a theme. We're talking about the brainstorming right now in your rough draft. So it needs to have some kind of a theme, right? And remember from ELA that themes are those big picture things, right? They're the message the author is trying to tell you. So in this case, what are you going to try and show your audience, right? I've listed some ideas below, right? Just kind of some big picture ideas, and then you would take a perspective on it, right? And you're welcome to pick from the list I gave you, but you're also welcome to come up with one of your own. So if you look at those and you're like, yeah, that doesn't really summarize how I think about manifest destiny and westward expansion, pick a different theme, right? All I ask is that you stay in time and stay in place. So in other words, got to be the 1800s, got to be the United States, got to talk about westward expansion. Those are the key points that your mural needs to include. Okay. But in terms of those kind of big picture ideas, you could talk about exploration, you could talk about expansion, right? You could talk about loss or about conquest. You talk about wealth or freedom, right? You could talk about conversion or about change. Those two things mean roughly the same thing. That's why they're together, right? You could just talk about the idea of manifest destiny. You might talk about the unknown, or again, you might choose some topic that I didn't list. All right, so now that you've picked a theme, right, you're going to pick some kind of a group that you're going to include, and it might be this inclusion piece. It might just be that it's from their perspective, right? This is important to note mostly because I had a kid last year who told me that for religious reasons he couldn't include people in drawings. Okay, so it could be from their perspective, and that's okay, right? And that was what he did and got credit for it. So we could be looking at white settlers or colonizers, as they're sometimes called, white missionaries, indigenous people, again, those are Native Americans, Californios, gold miners, mountain men, Chinese immigrants, pioneer women, Latter-day Saints, again, Latter-day Saints are the Mormons, some other group that I didn't list. There are certainly other groups that you could use, right? So again, you're either going to include actual pictures of the people or you're going to take it from their perspective. And that's fine. There's an artist statement to go with this, so you'll be able to tell me that that's what you did. Right? So now that you've got a theme and the people that you're going to include, right? And by the way, you can pick more than one group. So you could do Native Americans and settlers, for example, or gold miners and Californios, or maybe you're going to do pioneer women, missionaries, and mountain men, right? So you could choose multiple groups. That's fine, right? But it's time to dig into some specifics now that you've done those two things. So what are some people, some events, some places, some physical things that you might include in your mural? And again, remember, 1800s, westward expansion. That's what we're talking about, okay? And for question 4, just jot some quick ideas, some bullet points about what you're going to say in that artist statement, right? And artist statements, if you've never read one before, it really just talks about what does the piece mean and what are they trying to portray. So this is where, for example, if you're one of my kids who, for whatever reason, can't include images of people, this is where you might say, you know, my mural shows shows manifest destiny from an indigenous person's perspective, or something like that, right? It'll give you that space to still be able to make that very clear. This last page is just a rough draft, okay? So sometimes murals are words, sometimes they're pictures, oftentimes they're both, right? Start thinking through and arranging how things might appear on your mural and add them onto the paper, right? Sketch it out if you want to, or just write words for where various things are going to go. Be sure to include some thoughts if you're not doing actual drawing for a rough draft of like background colors or scenes. Again, if you want some additional ideas, I did post some from my travels that'll just give you some ideas for what types of things might people include, right? So what we're aiming for is something that's ultimately going to be the size of a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11 as the smallest. You could, if you decide 8.5 by 11 isn't enough space and you're super artistic and maybe you want to do a great big, you know, poster board that's like 3 feet by 2 feet, go for it, okay? But standard paper is fine. Worth knowing while we're talking about drawing. Number 1, I do not now, nor have I ever taught an art class. You are not graded on the quality of your art. It is a yes, no. Does the art exist? Okay? What does that mean? That means stick figures work just fine. Shapes work just fine. You can be a little abstract with it. You've got that artist statement to tell me what your mural actually means. Okay? So don't worry about, for example, if it's high quality art or not. Nobody else is going to see it but me. And I promise that I legitimately checklist grade artwork. As in, did you try to do something artistic? If you're at all worried about your artwork, you can always kind of add in some labels. But again, you've got an artist statement to tell me what you're showing me. Okay? Do your rough draft at the beginning of the week. Give me a couple of days. I'll give you some feedback. And then do your final draft. If you don't get this graded within a day or two, send me an email and say, hey, can you grade my rough draft for my mural project? Give me some feedback on it. And I will do it as soon as I'm able to, right? So either later that day or first thing the next day, so that you can get it turned around and get the final draft turned in before the end of the week. All right. If you have questions, if you need any help with anything, please go ahead, reach out, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in class.